So I was hearing words like, I am not African. Those words are strong and they're deep, and one must question why. I'm Joana. I uncover Africa, untold stories, and I want to help you heal through storytelling. Why do some Black Americans reject, dislike everything Africa? Of course, it's that person's right to feel that way. Maybe they have no connection apart from just the skin color, then it is okay. It really got me thinking. Over the centuries, when Africans were captured from the African continent, they lost their language, they lost their family, they lost their culture. So their identity is probably African American, or they will be like, no, Black American. Okay, I understand when they say I'm not African, because they had to build the only identity they know. They had to build it through pain and resilience in America, right? So it might not always be hate. It's just a kind of mechanism to defend the only identity they've ever come to know. So it's okay that many Black Americans today feel that their identity is uniquely African American or Black American, not African. But one thing though, we should not forget that the Western media over the centuries emphasized how backward, savagery, poor, ugly Africa was or is, right? This stereotype, they persist in the media till today, subtly, but there is then this mistrust and there is a lot of shame. So I understand when some people are like, I don't identify as African, especially when like generations backwards, like 300 years, they have no connection to the African continent, even though they look like the people from the African continent. But when what you are fed in the media, in the space you live, is everything negative about those people that look like you, and then there's the historical knowledge that your ancestors were captured from there, and these people there, some participated, there is a kind of disconnect. You want to disconnect. I understand that. I don't know. I want to know, is there shame? Is shame part of it? Is anger part of it? Is pain part of it? So why is there the strong rejection and disconnection? Then there's another point I got to see, because if you tend to look at like most of the doctors in certain regions in America, most of them are from Nigeria. They have Nigerian background, and there are lots of African Americans, like first, second generation now Africans migrating to America that are really doing well, right? So there is competition. That's another thing we should not undermine, right? There is a competition also happening there. So is this part of the rejection? Is this part of what is really spiking this divide? Because let's not forget, right? When enslavement began to happen, it grew stronger because outside forces were able to divide us. And we're still not going to recover from that pain if we keep allowing outside forces divide us. Now, outside forces is not going to be European colonizers. Outside forces is going to be the media telling us that everything about our heritage is bad. Outside forces is going to be like just the human condition of greed, competition, just not having empathy for the different circumstances that we all find ourselves. The experiences of Black Americans or African Americans, but now I'm referring to those that like 400 years ago history, right? In America, that's the identity and the world they know. And the experiences that their ancestors had to go through and the impact of that enslavement is something we should, as Africans who do not have that same story, have empathy about. And then on the other side, while enslavement trade was happening, colonialization was happening in the continent of Africa. And even after colonialization, new colonialization is still happening till today. So that is also another experience that the people in the African continent experience, and there should be empathy for that as well, right? Then there is still another experience like first, second, third generation diasporans, Africans that move to other countries like in Europe or America. That's another experience. But there's one common thing though that somehow we will all get to, hopefully not, but somehow we're all put in the same pot, right? When it comes to that experience. Like when white European sees you, they are not going to see you from that distance and say, oh, you're African American, Black American, first generation African migrant, Black European, African in Europe, or African in the African. They're going to see your skin color. That's the first thing they will see, and they will make their judgment. This is something we have to be aware about. So that means that we can't allow these different experiences that still happen within a framework of racial hierarchy. We can't allow these different experiences begin to divide us, begin to cause rejection amongst ourselves. But at the end of the day, as an African, woman. If a Black American say, I'm not African, I can't identify as African, it's okay. It's okay to have that feeling. It's okay to identify like that. We should let them be. But it's also okay to have multiple identities, right? You must not be one thing. The fact that you're Black American doesn't mean you're not African. The fact that you're African doesn't mean you're not something else. The whole idea of like clinging to one specific identity, this is not an African approach. We grew up with so many different people from so many different tribes and culture, but there is always this humanity that ties us all together. And as we keep reinventing ourselves, we will find this humanity. And I understand that when you really do not have any connection to a specific heritage, you can't claim that heritage. And then on the other side, as Africans, it's time to really start elevating those values that we want our diasporas to embrace. Like start bringing those values out, and we start within ourselves in our spaces. So yes, as an African, we may not always grasp the depth of trauma from enslavement, trade, and segregation in the US. But also as an African American or Black American, you may not also grasp the depth of trauma from colonialism that happened in the continent and the oppression and exploitation that's still going on in the continent as well, right? So the way forward for us is to start developing empathy, to start listening, to start seeing the other, to start trying to understand what causes this resentment, what causes this divide. So there's a clear disconnect, and it leads us to talking about each other, not seeing each other. At the end of the day, we can start dissecting, dismantling the systems to try to find empathy for one another, compassion for one another. This is probably how we can move forward. I don't know. I want to know your take. It's an invitation. If you can't identify, it's also okay. No judgment. We love you. If you can identify, reach out, drop your comments, ask your questions. Let's rub minds together and see how we can really design a healthier and better future for ourselves, not just for ourselves, for our kids, our grandkids, and future generations. I'm Joana. I uncover Africa, untold stories, and I want to help you heal through storytelling.